Hello and welcome to another episode of Curious Cat Crime Sunday with me, Shelby, and I have no pets today right now. So today's episode is going to be a continuation of the Ted Bundy video, and let's get to it. A little of a recap, but Ted Bundy is an American serial killer who is proven to have killed, I think it was like 33 women in a few different places. And this part is going to be about his trial, escapes, and trial again. So on August 16th, 1975, Bundy was arrested by Utah Highway Patrol Officer Bob Hayward in Granger, about another Salt Lake City suburb. Hayward observed Bundy cruising a residential area in his Volkswagen Beetle during the pre-dawn hours and fleeing at high speeds. After seeing the patrol car, he noticed that the Volkswagen's front passenger seat had been removed and placed in the rear seats. In search of the car, he found a ski mask, a second mask fashioned from pantyhose, a coil of rope, an ice pick, and other items initially assumed to be burglary tools. Bundy explained that the ski mask was for skiing, he had found the handcuffs in a dumpster, and that the rest were common household items. However, Detective Jerry Thompson remembered a similar suspect and car description from the November 1974 DeRanch kidnapping, and we spoke about them in the previous video. So he remembered this and Bundy's name from Kopler's phone call a month later. In search of Bundy's apartment, police found a guide to Colorado ski resorts with a check mark by the Wildwood Inn, a brochure that advertised, there's Ziggy. Ziggy, say hi. He's like, ooh, I can get up here now. Anyways, police found a guide to the Colorado ski resorts with a check mark by the Wildwood Inn, that's a tongue twister, and a brochure that advertised the Viewpoint High School play in Bountiful, where Kent had disappeared. The police did not have sufficient evidence to detain Bundy, so he was released on his own recognizance. Bundy later said that the searchers had missed a hidden collection of Polaroid photographs of his victims, which he destroyed after he was released. So I added all three words together. Salt Lake City police placed Bundy on a 24-hour surveillance, and Thompson flew to Seattle with two other detectives to interview Clover. She told them that in the years prior to Bundy's move to Utah, she discovered objects that she couldn't understand in her house and Bundy's apartment. These items included crutches, a bag of plaster, a Paris that he admitted stealing from a medical supply house, a metal cleaver that was never used for cooking, additional objects including surgical gloves, an oriental knife, and a wooden case that he kept in the glove compartment, and sack full of women's clothing. So, where was I? I lost my train of thought. Bundy was perpetually in debt, and Culver suspected that he had stolen almost everything of significant value that he possessed. When she confronted him over the new TV and stereo, he warned her, "If you tell anyone, I'll break your bad word neck." Sorry, I almost said it. She said Bundy became very upset whenever she considered cutting her hair, which was long and parted in the middle. She would sometimes waken in the middle of the night and find him under the bed covers with a flashlight examining her body. He kept a lug wrench taped halfway up a handle in the trunk of her car, another Volkswagen Beetle, which he often borrowed for protection. I had to figure out where my camera was. The detectives confirmed that Bundy had not been with Culver on any of the nights during which the Pacific Northwest victims had vanished, nor on the day Ott and Nosland were abducted from Lake Sammamish Beach State Park. Tongue twisters all around today. Shortly thereafter, Culver was interviewed by Seattle homicide detective Kathy McShinney and learned the existence of Diane Edwards and her brief engagement to Bundy around Christmas. In September, Bundy sold his Volkswagen Beetle to a Midvale teenager. Utah police impounded it, and FBI technicians dismantled and searched it. They found hairs matching samples obtained from Campbell's body. Later, they also identified their hair strands microscopically indistinguishable from those of Smith and Duranch. FBI lab specialist Robert Neal concluded that the presence of hair strands in the one car matching 3 different victims who had never met one another would be a coincidence of mind-boggling rarity. On October 2nd, detectives put Bundy in a lineup. Duranch immediately identified him as Officer Roslin, and witness from Bountiful recognized him as a stranger at the Viewpoint High School auditorium. There was insufficient evidence to link him to Kent, whose body had not been found, and not more than enough evidence to charge him with aggravated kidnapping and attempted criminal assault on Duranch. He was freed on $15,000 bail. Look, I know it was a different time. That still doesn't seem like enough. I mean, he's thought to have murdered people. He was at least being charged with kidnapping, and what was the other thing? It was like kidnapping and attempted criminal assault. Come on. 15,000? That's crazy. Oops, let me turn my sound off. Ignore that, sorry. Okay, so, anyways, which was paid by his parents. Okay, he spent most of the time between indictment and the trial in Seattle living in Culver's house. Seattle, whoa, you're getting interviewed by police officers and saying you find all this creepy stuff, and yet you're gonna let him live with you? Alright, okay, to each his own, you know. Let's see. Living in Culver's house, Seattle police had sufficient evidence to charge him in the Pacific Northwest murders, but kept him under close surveillance. When Ted had insufficient evidence, When Ted and I stepped out on the porch to go somewhere, Culver wrote, so many marked police cars started up that it sounded like the beginning of the Indy 500. In November, the 3 principal Bundy investigators, Jerry Thompson from Utah, Robert Keppel from Washington, and Michael Fisher from Colorado, met in Aspen, Colorado, exchanged information with 30 detectives and prosecutors from 5 states. While officials left the meeting, which was later referred to as the Aspen Summit, convinced that Bundy was the murderer they sought. They agreed that more hard evidence would be needed before they could charge him with the murders. In February 1976, Bundy stood trial for Duranch kidnapping. On the advice of attorney John O'Connell, he waived his right to a jury due to the negative publicity surrounding the case. After a 4-day bench trial and a weekend of deliberation, Judge Stuart Hansen Jr. found him guilty of kidnapping and assault. In June, he was sentenced to 1 to 15 years in Utah State Prison. In October, he was found hiding in the bushes in the prison yard carrying an escape kit. I keep doing it with that hand. Escape kit. Road maps, airline schedules, a social security card, and spent several weeks in solitary confinement. Later that month, Colorado authorities charged him with Campbell's murder. After a period of resistance, he waived extradition proceedings, and that was transferred to Aspen in January 1977. Now let's get into the escapes. On June 7, 1977, Bundy was transported 40 miles or 64 kilometers from Garfield County Jail in Glenwood Springs to Pitkin County Courthouse in Aspen for the preliminary hearing. He had elected to serve as his own attorney, and as such was excused by the judge from wearing handcuffs and leg shackles. During a recess, he asked to visit the courthouse law library to research his case. Which shielded from the guard's view behind the bookcase, he opened a window and jumped to the ground from a second-story building, injuring his right ankle when he landed. After shedding the outer layer of clothes, Bundy limped through Aspen as roadblocks were set up on the outskirts. He then hiked the Aspen Mountains. Near its summit, he broke into a hunting cabin and stole food, clothing, and a rifle. The following day, he left the cabin and continued south towards the town of Crested Boot? I'm not sure. I might be wrong on that. Anyways, he became lost in the forest. For 2 days, he wandered aimlessly on a mountain, missing 2 trails that led downward to his intended destination. On June 10th, he broke into a camping trailer on Maroon Lake, 10 miles or 16 kilometers south of Aspen, taking food and ski parka. However, instead of continuing southward, he walked back north towards Aspen, eluding roadblocks and search parties along the way. 3 days later, he stole a car on the edge of Aspen Golf Course. Cold, sleep-deprived, and constant pain from a sprained ankle, Bundy drove back to Aspen, where 2 police officers noticed his car weaving in and out of his lane and pulled him over. He had been a fugitive for 6 days. 6 days. That's crazy. In the car were maps of the mountain areas near Aspen and the prosecutors were using to demonstrate the location of Campbell's body. As his attorney, Bundy had his rights of discovery, indicating that his escape had been planned. Got something in my eye. Sorry. Back in jail in Glenwood Springs, Bundy ignored the advice of friends and legal advisors to stay put. The case against him, already weak at best, was deteriorating steadily at the pre-trial motion, consistently resolved in his favor. Significant bits of evidence were ruled inadmissible. A more rational defendant might have realized this and stood a good chance of acquittal, and that being murder charge in Colorado would probably have dissuaded other prosecutors. With as little as a year and a half to serve on the Durant conviction, had Ted preserved, he could have been a free man. Instead, Bundy assembled a new escape plan. He acquired a detailed floor plan of the Garfield County Jail and a hacksaw blade from another inmate. He accumulated $500 in cash and smuggled in over a 6-month period by visitors, Boone in particular. Did we talk about Boone yet? Anyways. During the evening, with other prisoners were showering, he sawed a hole in a 1 square foot between the steel reinforcement bars in his cell, and having lost 35 pounds or 16 kilograms, he was able to wiggle through and explore the crawl space above. In the weeks followed, multiple reports of informants of movements while within the ceiling during the night were being investigated. By late 1977, Bundy's impending trial had become a cause célèbre. It looks like it's in another language, so I'm not sure how to say that. Let's see if I can figure it out. Nope. In a small town in Aspen, Bundy filed a motion to change the venue to Denver. On December 23rd, the Aspen trial judge granted the request, but to Colorado Springs, where juries had histories of being hostile to murder suspects. On the night of December 30th, with most of the jail staff on Christmas break, non-violent prisoners on furlough with their families, Bundy piled books and files in his bed, covered them with a blanket, and simulated his sleeping body. Crawled through the crawl space, he broke through the ceiling of the apartment of the chief jailer, who was out for an evening with his wife, changed into street clothes and from the jail closet, and walked out the door to freedom. Freedom. Crazy. After stealing a car, Bundy drove eastward to Glenwood Springs, and the car soon broke down in the mountains of Interstate 70. A passing motorist gave him a ride to Vail, 60 miles or 97 kilometers to the east. From there, he was caught a bus to Denver, where he boarded a morning flight to Chicago. Back in Glenwood Springs, the jail skeleton crew did not discover the escape until noon of December 31st. Man, those books look like people. Ziggy, you're being very distracting, sir. More than 17 hours later. By then, Bundy was already in Chicago. Okay, so this is Florida murders and the rearrest. So we're going to go to this now. So, from Chicago, Bundy traveled a train to Ann Arbor, Michigan, where he was present in a local tavern on January 2nd. 5 days later, he stole a car and drove south to Atlanta. When he boarded a bus and arrived in Tallahassee, Florida, on the morning of January 8th, He stayed for one night in the hotel before he had rented a room under an alias, Chris Hagan, at a boarding house near the Florida State University or FSU campus. Bundy later said that in the initial resolve to find legitimate employment and refrain from further criminal activity, knowing he would probably remain free and undetected in Florida indefinitely as long as he did not attract attention by police. But his lone job application at a construction site had been abandoned when he asked to produce identification. He reverted to old habits of shoplifting, stealing money, credit cards from women's wallets left in shopping carts at local grocery stores, and in early hours of January 15, 1978, 1 week after his arrival in Tallahassee, Bundy entered FSU's Chi Omega sorority house through a rear door of the faulty locking mechanism. Beginning at about 2:45, he bludgeoned Margaret Elizabeth Bowman, 21. It would help if I didn't say the names wrong. With a piece of oak firewood as she slept. Then garroted her with a nylon stocking. He then entered the bottom bedroom of 20-year-old Lisa Janet Levy and beat her unconscious and strangled her, tore something off, bit deeply into her buttock, and actually assaulted her with a hair mist bottle. In an adjoining bedroom, he attacked Kathy Kleiner, 21, breaking her jaw and deeply lacerating her shoulder. Karen Chandler, 21, who suffered a concussion, broken jaw, lost teeth, and a crushed finger. Chandler and Kleiner survived the attack. Kleiner attributed their survival to automobile headlights illuminating the interior of their room and frightening away the attacker. Tallahassee detectives determined that the 4 attacks took place in a total of less than 15 minutes. That's insane. Within earshot of more than 30 witnesses who heard nothing. After leaving the sorority house, Bundy broke into the basement apartment 8 blocks away and attacked 21-year-old FSU student Cheryl Thomas, dislocating her shoulder and fracturing her jaw and skull in 5 places. She was left with permanent deafness and equilibrium damage that ended her dance career. On Thomas's bed, police found a secretion of some kind. I can't say it. A stain and pantyhose mask containing 2 hairs similar to the Bundy class and characteristic. On February 8th, Bundy drove 150 miles or 240 kilometers east of Jacksonville and stole in a stolen FSU van. In a parking lot, he approached 14-year-old Leslie Parmenter, the daughter of Jacksonville Police Department Chief of Detectives, identifying himself as Richard Bartman, Fire Department, and retreated with Parment's older brother arrived and confronted him. That afternoon, he backtracked 60 miles, or 97 kilometers, westward to Lake City. At Lake City Junior High the following morning, 12-year-old Kimberly Diane Leach was summoned to her homeroom by a teacher to retrieve her forgotten purse. She never returned to class. 7 weeks later, after the intensive search, her partially mummified remains were found in a pig furrow shed near Suwannee River State Park, 35 miles or 56 kilometers northwest of Lake City. Forensic experts surmise that, we're not going to read that, she's 12. Okay, so the really bad things happened to her. On February 12th, with insufficient cash to pay his overdue rent and growing suspicion by police were closing in on him, Bundy stole a car and fled Tallahassee, driving westward across the Florida Panhandle. 3 days later, at around 1 a.m., he was stopped by Pensacola police officer David Lee near the Alabama state line after the wants and warrants check showed his Volkswagen vehicle was stolen. When they told him he was under arrest, Bundy kicked Lee's leg out from under him and took off running. Lee fired 2 warning shots, then gave chase and tackled him. The 2 struggled over Lee's gun before the officer finally subdued and arrested Bundy. In a stolen vehicle were 3 sets of IDs belonging to female FSU student, 21 stolen credit cards, and a stolen television set. Also found were a pair of dark-rimmed, non-prescription glasses and a pair of plaid socks. Later identified as the disguised warrant of Richard Burton Fire Department in Jacksonville. As Lee transported the suspect to jail, unaware that he had just arrested FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives, he heard Bundy say, "I wish you had killed me." Following the change of venue to Miami, Bundy stood trial at Chi Omega homicide and assaults in June 1979. The trial was covered by 250 reporters from 5 continents and was the first to be televised nationally in the United States. Despite the presence of 5 court-appointed attorneys, Bundy again handled much of his own defense. From the beginning, he sabotaged the entire defense effort out of spite and distrust and grandiose delusion, Nelson Letter wrote. Ted was facing murder charges and was with a possible death sentence. All that mattered to him, apparently, was that he was being in charge. According to Mike Minerva, a Tallahassee public defender and member of the defense team, a pretrial plea bargain was negotiated in which Bundy would plead guilty to killing Levy, Bowman, and Leach in exchange for a firm 75-year prison sentence. Prosecutors were amenable to a deal, by one account because prospects of losing at trial were very good. Bundy, on the other hand, saw the plea deal not only as a means to avoid the death penalty, but also a tactical move. If I could just read today, that would be very nice, please. Okay. He could enter this plea and then wait 5 years for evidence to disintegrate and become lost, and to witnesses to die, move on, or retract their testimony. Once the case against him had been deteriorated beyond repair, he could file a post-conviction motion to set aside the plea and secure an acquittal. At the last minute, however, Bundy refused the deal. It made him realize he was going to have to stand up in front of the whole world and say, "I'm guilty," Minerva said. He just couldn't do it. So, at the trial, crucial testimony came from Chi Omega sorority member Connie Hastings, who placed Bundy in the vicinity of the sorority house that evening, and Nita Neely, who saw him leaving the house clutching a murder weapon. Incriminating evidence, physical evidence, including impressions of bite wounds, Bundy had indicated. I'll put a photo here because I think it's a crazy photo. Incriminating physical. I read that. Inflicted on Levy's left buttocks, which forensic odontologist Richard Surveyon and Lowell Levine, that's a tongue twister name, matched to casings of Bundy's teeth. The jury deliberated for less than 7 hours, before convicting Bundy on the July 24th, 1979, of the Bowman and Levy murders. 3 counts of attempted first-degree murder for assault on Kleiner and Chandler and Thomas, and 2 counts of burglary. Trial judge Edward Court imposed death sentence for the murder conviction. 6 months later, a second trial took place in Orlando for the abduction and murder of Leach. Bundy was found guilty once again after less than 8 hours of deliberating, due particularly to the testimony of an eyewitness who saw him leading Leach from the schoolyard in his stolen van. Important material evidence, including clothing fibers with an unusual manufacturing error, found in the van and on Leach's body, which, I need to stop saying Shelby, come on, and then I do it right after, good job, which matched fibers from the jacket Bundy was wearing when he was arrested. During the penalty phase of Leach's trial, Bundy took advantage of the obscure Florida law providing the marriage declaration in court in the presence of a judge constituted a legal marriage. As he was questioning Boone, who had moved to Florida to be near Bundy, had testified on his behalf during both trials, and was again testifying on behalf of the character witness, he asked her to marry him. She accepted, and Bundy declared to the court that they were legally married. On February 10, 1980, Bundy was sentenced a 3rd time to death by electrocution. As the sentence was announced, he reportedly stood and shouted, "Tell the jury they were wrong." The third sentence The third death sentence would be the one ultimately carried out only 9 years later. On October 24th, 1982, Boone gave birth to daughter Rose Bundy. While conjugal visits were not allowed in the Florida State Prison in Rayford, where Bundy was incarcerated, inmates were known to pool their money in order to bribe guards to allow the inmates time alone with a female visitor. Shortly after the conclusion of Leach's trial and the beginning of the long appeal process that followed, Bundy initiated a series of interviews with Stephen McCod and Hugh Ainsworth, speaking mostly in third person to avoid the stigma of confession. He began the first time to divulge details of his crime and thought process. Bundy recounted his career as a thief and confirmed that Cofer's long-time suspicion that he had shoplifted virtually everything of sustenance he owned. The big payoff for me, he said, was actually possessing whatever it was I had stolen. I really enjoyed having something that I had wanted to go and gone out and taken. Possessions provided to be an important motive for ape and murder as well. Sexual assault, he said, fulfilled his need for to totally possess his victim. At first, he killed his victims as a matter of expenditure to eliminate the possibility of being caught. But later, murders became part of the adventure, he says. The ultimate possession was, in fact, the taking of life, he said, and then the physical possession that remained. Bundy also confided in Special Agent William Hagesmer of the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit. Hagesmer was struck with a deep, almost mystical satisfaction that Bundy took in murders. He said that after a while, the murders is not a crime of lust or violence, Hagesmer related. It becomes possession. They are part of you. The victims become part of you, and you two are one forever. The grounds where you killed them and leave them to become sacred to you, and you will always be drawn back to them. Bundy told Hagesmer that he considered himself to be an amateur or impulsive killer in his early years, moving into the term of prime and predator phase at about the time of Healy's murder in 1974, and implied that he had begun killing well before 1974, although he never explicitly admitted having done so. In July 1984, prison guards found 2 hacksaw blades hidden in Bundy's cell. A steel bar in one of the cell's windows had been sawed completely off through the bottom and glued back in place with a handmade soap-based adhesive. Several months later, guards found an unauthorized mirror. Bundy was moved to a different cell. Shortly thereafter, he was charged with disciplinary infraction for unauthorized correspondence with another high-profile criminal, John Hinckley Jr. We can talk about him in another one if you would like. He was, an American man who he attempted to assassinate U.S. President Ronald Reagan. Interesting. Not good interesting, just I didn't expect that. In October 1984, Bundy contacted Keppel and offered to share his self-proclaimed expertise in serial killer psychology. In the ongoing hunt of Washington for the Green River Killer, later identified as Gary Ridgway, which I do believe I did a video on before. I definitely did a PowerPoint for school on that. Keppel and Green River Task Force detectives David Reichert interviewed Bundy, but Ridgway remained at large for further 17 years. Keppel published a detailed documentary of the Green River interview, and later collaborated with McCod and other examination of the interview material. In early 1986, an execution date of March 4th was set for the Chi Omega convictions by the U.S. Supreme Court, issued a brief stay of execution and was quickly rescheduled. In April, shortly after the new date, July 2nd, was announced, Bundy finally confessed to Haminger and Nelson that they believed that the full range of his depredation included details of what he did to some of his victims after their death. He told them that he revisited Taylor Mountain, that one word from last episode I don't like to say, and other secondary crime scenes, often several times, to let his victims perform actual acts on the bodies, and putrefaction forced him to stop. In some cases, he drove for several hours each way and remained the entire night. In Utah, he applied makeup to Smith's lifeless face and repeatedly washed Ames' hair. "If you got the time," he told Hamager, "they can't be anything you want them to be." They can be anything you want them to be. He took off the head approximately 12 of his victims with a hacksaw and kept at least one of the severed heads, probably the 4 later found in Taylor Mountain, in his apartment in a period of time before disposing them. Less than 15 hours before the scheduled July 2nd execution, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals stayed its indefinite and remanded that the trial make a case for review on multiple technicalities, including Bundy's mental competency to stand trial and an erroneous instruction by the trial judge during the penalty phase, requiring the jury to break 6-by-6 tie between life imprisonment and death penalty, which ultimately were never resolved. A new date, November 18th, was then set to carry out Leach's sentence. The 11th Circuit Court issued a stay on November 17th, just one day before. In mid-1988, the 11th Circuit ruled Bundy, and in December, the Supreme Court denied the motion to review the ruling over the dissents of Justice Thurgood Marshall and William J. Brennan, Jr. Within hours of that final denial, a firm execution date was set for January 24, 1989, was announced. Bundy's journey through the appeals court had been unusually rapid for a capital murder case. Contrary to popular belief, the courts moved Bundy as fast as they could. Even the prosecutions acknowledged that Bundy's lawyer never employed delaying tactics. Though people everywhere see the apparent delay in execution, Ted Bundy was actually on the fast track. With all the avenues exhausted, and no further motivation to deny his crimes, Bundy agreed to speak frankly to investigators. He confessed to Keppel that he had committed all 8 of the Washington, Oregon homicides for which he was the prime suspect. He described 3 additional previously unknown victims in Washington and 2 in Oregon, whom he declined to identify if indeed he knew their identity. What are you doing, little boy? What are you doing? Sorry, that was distracting. I have no clue where I was now. Okay. He said left the 5th corpse Mason on Taylor Mountain and incinerated the head of Culper's fireplace. He described that word that starts with an I, I'm not going to say, crime scene where the bones of Ott, Naslund, Hawkins were found. And it was almost just like he was just there, Keppel said, like he was seeing everything. He had infatuated the idea because he spent so much time there. He was totally consumed with the murders all the time. Nelson impressions were similar. It was an absolute misogyny of his crimes that stunned me, she wrote. His manifest rage against women. He had no compassion at all. He was totally engrossed in detail. His murder were his accomplishments. Bundy confessed to detectives in Idaho, Utah, and Colorado that he committed numerous additional homicides, including several that were unknown to police. He explained that when he was in Utah, he would bring victims back to his apartment where he would reenact scenarios depicting the covers of detective magazines. A new ulterior strategy quickly became adamant. He withheld many details, hoping to parlay the incomplete information into yet another stay of execution. There are other burned remains in Colorado, he admitted, but refused to elaborate. The new strategy, immediately dubbed Ted's Bones for Time scheme, severed only to deepen the resolve of authorities to see Bundy executed on schedule, yielded little detailed information. In the case of where he had given details, nothing was found. Colorado Detective Matt Livendale interpreted this as a conflict between his desire to postpone his execution by divulging information and his needs for remains in total possession, the only person who knew the victim's true resting place. When it became clear that there were no further stays would be forthcoming of the courts, Bundy supporters began lobbying for the only remaining option: execute clemency. Diane Werner, a young Florida attorney and Bundy's last purported love interest, asked the families of several Colorado and Utah victims to petition Florida Governor Bob Martinez for a postponement to give Bundy time to reveal more information. All refused. The family had already believed that the victims were dead and that Ted had killed them, wrote Nelson. They did not need his confession. Martinez made it clear that he would not agree to further delay any case. We are going to have the system manipulated, he told reporters. For him to negotiate his life over the bodies of victims is despicable. Boone had championed Bundy's innocence throughout all of his trials and felt deeply betrayed by the admission that he was, in fact, guilty. She moved back to Washington with her daughter and refused to accept phone calls from morning of his execution. She was hurt by his relationship with Diane, Nelson wrote, devastated by the sudden wholesale confession in his last days. Haminger was present during Bundy's final interview with investigators. On the eve of his execution, he talked of suicide. He did not want to give the state the satisfaction to watch him die, Haminger said. Bundy was executed in the Railford electric chair at 7:16 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Tuesday, July 24, 1989. His last words were directed to his attorney, Jim Coleman, and Methodist minister Fred Lawrence. Jim and Fred, I'd like to give you the love to my family and friends. Hundreds of revealers sang and danced to set off fireworks in the pasture across from the prison, and the execution was carried out. Then cheered as a white hearse containing Bundy's corpse departed the prison. He was cremated in Gainesville and his ashes scattered at an undisclosed location in Cascade Range in Washington State in accordance to his will. And I will say one thing I remember is, not that I was there, but that I remember hearing, was they were screaming, fry Bundy fry, or burn Bundy fry, or fry Friday Bundy, or something crazy like that. I don't know. Anyways, if you like this video and you want to listen to more of mine, please click subscribe as I post every week, or I try to, and go visit some of my other videos. There is a part 1 to this video that is the last video I uploaded, and I hope you'll check it out. Anyways, be good to each other, stay safe, and have a great week. Bye.